Good afternoon. A very, very warm welcome to our training for mentors. I'm going to start by introducing myself. I'm Natasha Chowdhury. I'm PCM here at Oakland School, and I'll be leading today's session. But before I get into the nuts and bolts of today's session, I'd just like to introduce Ruth Smith from the East London Teaching Schools Hub, who'll be saying a few words before we start. Thank you.
Thanks, Natasha. Hello, everyone. Some of you I probably know and have seen before. But I just want to take a few moments to say hello. Thanks for being here. The reason I'm here to talk is the work that you're doing here together does work as part of the East London Teaching School Hub provision. And some of you may know a lot about us already, but I'll just rehearse exactly what it is we are. So we are East London Teaching School Hub. We are one of 87 in the country. And our responsibility is to make sure that all schools, state schools in Hackney and Tower Hamlets can get access to the best quality professional development, all the way through from initial teacher training up to CEO of a trust, if that's what people want. Of course, we all know that CPD, the biggest, most important aspect of someone's teacher development, particularly early on in their career, is the mentoring they receive from an expert teacher such as yourselves. And so we're really pleased that you're all coming together today to discuss what it is to be a really effective initial teacher training mentor. East London Teaching School Hub has a responsibility for ensuring that initial teacher training within our region is the best it can possibly be. And we're really excited as well that there may be the potential from 2024 that we can actually be an accrediting body. Well, in fact, we have been successful in getting accreditation to be an awarding body for QTS from 2024. So you'll probably hear more from us about that over the next few months. The way we work as a teaching school hub is we're underpinned by the principles of working transparently with a view around inclusion. Everybody is welcome, and we want to make sure every student that we are responsible for in our schools gets the best possible outcomes and experience. And we also believe in collegiality. So everything we do together across schools and across regions, and this is a perfect example of that. So that's enough from me. I'm going to hand straight back to Natasha, who is going to be leading today. Thank you very much, Natasha.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Appreciate it. And we're also joined today by Tessa Blair and by Laura Boyer from Mulberry Academy Shoreditch, who are also part of our consortium as we are looking at putting together an extended offer for ITT in our secondary schools. I just want to start with a little bit of housekeeping. If you could please make sure, if you've not already done so, can you please make sure that you have named yourself with your school and that you have your cameras on, please. And just to cover the aims of our session, first of all, apologies, we are running a little bit behind time. We had a few technical hitches at the beginning, but we'll aim to finish in a timely manner if possible. Our aim of the session is to take theory to practice, to help you develop into confident mentors and to complement any training that you're already having with your universities. And our session essentially is in two parts. We're going to look at effective feedback through coaching. And as a result of some of our responses from our mentors as to their CPD needs, we're going to take the second part of the session to look at supporting and challenging mentees using part 2 of the professional standards. So I'm going to get you to think, first of all, onto our second slide, as to what mentoring is, because we need to understand what the common terms are here. So I'll ask you, Laura, to flip the slide. Thank you. And some of you will be new to the mentoring role or maybe slightly inexperienced in it, so looking to refresh. And it's important we start with a common understanding of what our terms are for the first part of the session. So I want you to reflect on that for a moment and pop your thoughts into the chat, please, as to what you think mentoring is in a sentence or two. Okay, some interesting ideas coming forward. There's some common themes here. Okay, so there's some common themes here in terms of providing a balance of support, advice, and guidance. Oh, I like the assisting learning journey. That's a nice way of putting it. And Louise has mentioned the importance of a professional to provide guidance. That's an interesting response from Mulberry Academy, that the idea of being a good role model. I think that's really important. It's very much like being a teacher as well, that you have to model the values that you are espousing. We seem to have a common understanding as to what these things actually are. So I want to take that thought forward. And in a moment, Lara's going to put us into breakout rooms. We're going to make this really quick. And I want you to begin to think about two aspects in your breakout rooms. And Lara, I'm thinking at the moment, looking at numbers that we've got, we could probably do groups of about 3 to 4, depending on whereabouts we're at. I want you to think about what key qualities that a mentor would need, and also what skills that you would need in order to provide effective mentoring. And there's a few key ones that I'm particularly thinking about that we'll discuss later. But in your groups, I want you to think about those kind of things. Also think about perhaps how your own experience of mentoring when you were in training perhaps has informed your ideas about what is quality mentoring, or perhaps not. Perhaps you didn't have such a quality experience yourself, and that informs how you would like mentoring to be. So the breakout rooms are going to be just under, we'll do 5 minutes for perhaps an introduction as to who you are in groups of 3 or 4, and to think about those key questions. What are the key qualities and key skills that you need, bearing in mind that some of you are going to be mentoring in different training routes, so you may feel that there are differences between them. So as soon as we're ready, I'll ask Lara to put us into groups. Almost everybody back, so I'll restart in just a moment. So Lara, if we could just perhaps flip to the next slide, please, on that one.
And in
so I'm going to go to perhaps a couple of people. So if I could go to Josie and Aisha from Mulberry Academy Shoreditch, what were your thoughts on this?
So we said in terms of skills that we thought guiding as opposed to telling trainees what to do was quite important. And we also said at the start to provide more holistic support because it can be quite overwhelming for trainees at the start.
Yes.
And we also mentioned that reassuring trainees that it's okay to feel overwhelmed or to find things challenging at the beginning was also important. And the biggest quality we mentioned was being approachable, and especially at the beginning, mentees feeling like your door is always open and they know that they're supported by you and they can ask you.
Yeah, that's really interesting ideas. And I think a lot of what you're talking about rests on ideas around well-being, which is something that increasingly, thankfully, we are thinking about a lot more in teaching. And that leads quite nicely on, if I could get Lara to click on slightly, on one of the key points that I think is really quite pertinent here, that although there are many key qualities that I think you encapsulated quite beautifully in some of your answers there, one of the key ones is this idea of being a good listener. There's a couple of taps on, please, Lara. And active listening, which can be quite tricky, and can be quite tricky in terms of getting that balance of supporting your trainee, but also making sure that you're providing adequate challenge as well. Some of you may have come across in some of your training at school about the concept of active listening, and it's really quite vital in coaching. What's your understanding of that phrase, active listening? Anyone, or I'll pick somebody out, but it'd be nice to have hands up. Unmute yourself if you think you've got an idea.
I can't see where to put my hand up.
Okay, Louise, thank you.
Thank you. Making sure that you are giving them your full attention when they're talking to you, because we're so busy. There's so many things coming at us at the time. And it's really easy to, just feel like you're in a hurry. You want to give a quick answer. And actually, if they do approach you and want to ask you something, and you are just in the middle of dealing with something else, be really clear. Come back in 5 minutes, or I'll see you at break time. I am here, but let's talk about it when I've got time to listen properly.
Yeah, and I think establishing those parameters very early on, that you are approachable, as Josie and Aisha said, that it's so important, because otherwise how are they meant to know that that's okay with you? And I think we also forget that when you're starting out new at a school, that it's almost like another language that we speak in schools. We speak in various different acronyms, and if you're coming from outside, how do you know what those things are? So active listening is really, really important. I don't know about you, but it can be very, very tricky to not want to jump in and fix things instantaneously, and getting that balance between listening to what the concerns of your trainee are and thinking, actually, I'm just going to fix this. What is the danger of being a bit of a fixer? Because it's the opposite of what coaching is.
It takes away the opportunity for them to have their own learning experiences, I think.
Can you expand a little bit on that, please, Anushka?
So it's just that, I guess, if you're just there willing to fix things for them, then they're not able to learn for themselves. So, you know, like, it's always easy to jump in, but for them, it might be actually more beneficial for them to go through the experience and then learn from it, and then they can self-reflect and then think, okay, so how can I improve on it myself? And then hopefully they can make those improvements the next time.
Yeah, that's beautifully put. Lara, I'm just going to get you to click on to the next couple of slides, because I really want us to get onto a bit of an activity. So I want us to take a look at this, and this is thinking about where coaching actually sits. And how it is that we can get that balance between providing support for our trainees, but also making sure that they can get that sense of independence that Louise and Anushka illustrated so well, is actually so important in terms of developing them. And one of the things that I asked you to begin to think about when you were in your breakout rooms is the extent to which your own experiences being mentored is informing your approach to mentoring right now. So some of you may have had fantastic mentors and you want to emulate that experience that you had, and some of you may have felt actually that you got a bit of a raw deal out of mentoring when you were training, and it's important to have that sense of self-awareness, in the same way that we ask teachers to have that sense of self-awareness about how it is that our own experience of education informs how it is that we teach. We will, by the way, send on a copy of this PowerPoint to you, because we could potentially make this a 2-hour session, but we are very, very conscious of the fact that your time is incredibly precious. So I'm gonna move on to think about why it is that coaching is a useful model. And I think you've answered that question to a degree about when coaching is useful. And forget just to do it 3 clicks, please, Lara. And Whitmore said that it's really helpful in terms of helping them to learn rather than actually teaching them. And we do want to encourage our trainees to have a sense of independence, but it's also important to get that balance as to where it is that they might actually need a bit of advice. So what coaching does is it encourages deep professional learning, and it gets them to hone their own sense of responsibility, and also, quite crucially, ownership over the classes that they have, and be diagnostic about their own practice. But when you're right at the beginning of your practice, you worry about everything. Everything becomes a source of angst. So what coaching will enable them to do diagnostically is to begin to hone in on what those issues are and what they can actually do about them. And if I was to say, well, what is the difference essentially between mentoring and coaching? If I'm mentoring you, I'm telling you what to do. Coaching is where I would want you to be diagnostic about your practice and what you want to do next. Now, when you're a trainee, you may not necessarily know exactly what that is, but the important thing is, through those coaching conversations, you would have an idea about what you need to prioritize first. And if you don't know the answer to that question, so for example, you might want to know further up what you do about, say, behavior management within your classroom. And you might want to ask yourself, well, where can I go to get examples of good practice? And how do I then implement that into my everyday practice? As opposed to you as the mentee saying, you need to do this, this, and this, which ultimately is not going to build that sense of independence that we want in our trainees. So thinking about moving this forward, Lara, thank you. we want to think about our challenge in terms of moving beyond competence, moving beyond what the teacher standard says, and actually getting them to a situation where they feel really confident in their own practice. Unfortunately, a lot of trainee teachers still leave teacher training still quite nervous about the idea of teaching, and not having that confidence that we really want. And that's what we want them to leave teacher training with, where we're getting that very delicate equilibrium between providing high levels of quality support, and we're being very targeted with that support, but also thinking about high challenges. And sometimes that can be really difficult for you as the mentor to think about where that equilibrium is and how it is that you gradually give on a little bit more responsibility. So what is perhaps more appropriate in teacher training is thinking of coaching as an instructional coaching model. So Lara, if it gets to the next one. So it is arguable that the pure coaching model that some of you may have done training on in school is not necessarily helpful in terms of teacher training, because you only have a sense of, you only know what you know. So many of our trainees will not have that full understanding of pedagogy or systems and who does what inside schools. But instructional coaching essentially means that they can find solutions within the parameters of their knowledge, and that with each coaching meeting you can gradually expand that out. So it will be non-directive, and they need to form their own solutions, or at least you let them lead. And it's important that rather than actually telling them what to do in terms of instructions, that you're using questions to enable them to form those solutions, and that you are refocusing that conversation where you might perhaps going off onto a tangent. I'm going to give you some examples of these in just a moment as to how it is, what types of questions that you might wish to use. Go to the next one. So why is it this might be useful? Well, it gives them a repertoire of skills that they would need in terms of teaching. And it provides them with a certain understanding of pedagogy, which can be different in different schools. And we can still provide them with technical and organisational advice. Going back to the point that was made earlier, that they only know what they know. And this is where your induction is absolutely vital. Because sometimes we might wonder as mentees, why have they not done X, Y, Z, which seems immediately obvious to us. The question to ask yourself is, how would they know? So don't necessarily assume that certain aspects of training will be covered in university. If you want them to know certain things, if you want them to demonstrate certain skills in the classroom, you need to ensure that that is built into your induction programme and within your mentoring. So that then you can refer to those in your meetings. And also it's important for them to understand that it's a safe space where they can talk about the areas of their practice that they feel that they need assistance with, and that they can then trial and error. They can have an approach of trial and error, and that they will make mistakes in the classroom. It's not going to be perfect, but what we're looking for is we're looking for progress over time. And what progress over time looks like is that there may be some days where some days are going to be better than others, but we would expect to see a general trend of progress. So there are some people who worry about the coaching approach as saying, well, how do you have accountability within that? If you're always sort of saying, well, this is going to be a safe environment to say what's wrong. But you would still expect to see the general trend of progress. And certainly if you have a trainee who doesn't have awareness of aspects of their practice that need sorting out, that in itself is an issue. So if I have had trainees, for example, who can't see when there's been a problem with behaviour in their classroom, and if they can't see that, that in itself is a problem. So there are several models of coaching that we can look at, and there is a vast array of resources that are out there, but I'm going to just show you one model. So essentially all coaching cycles work on a basis of reflection as to what issues there are, what goals you wish to set, learning that's put in place, and then making sure you're applying it. And it's a process where you keep holding those through. So it's not something that begins and ends and you restart it, you revisit those themes. Here at Oaklands, we use the GROW model, which I'm going to give you in just a moment. Lara's going to pop this into the chat in just a moment, but here's some example questions. This is by no means cut and dry. You can use some other examples. So Lara, if you put those on the screen, please. And these are set up in the grow model stage. So where you're establishing what the goals are, you're looking at what the reality is. So why is it, what are the barriers, for example, what do I need to do to put that into place? And then I would look at options. Who would I need to go to, for example? And then the wrap up stage of it is where you are working out what is going to happen next, which I think makes this a really, really good model, because it gets it target focused and focused on practice in the classroom, so that you're not just learning this in terms of a theory, that we have some actual concrete goals that you can go away and learn on, and then we will come back and reflect on those in our next mentoring meeting. And we're going to give you a moment to review those questions, and as you review them, we're going to get you to view a clip of a lesson that was recorded. It's a video that's on YouTube, and we're going to get you to do some group work on it, just to give you a little bit of a heads up. And when we split you into groups, we're going to split you as to if you were the mentor, if you were the mentee, and one person is going to be the facilitator. So we're going to give you a moment to read those questions through, just so to give you a bit of an oversight as to what some of the coaching questions look like and how they might facilitate opening up conversation. So I'll give you a moment to scan over those.
Natasha,
and Lara will load up a video for you.
Natasha, the
Yeah.
questions are now in the chat as well.
Yeah, sure. I'll have a look at those while you scan it over. Okay, that's fine. You'll find actually that a lot of coaching models will get you to scale issues on a scale of 1 to 10. It's a good way of, when you're reviewing something, to review, have you made progress? And it's also a good way of reviewing how serious the issue is. So think back to, you know, some of the issues that cause trainees angst, for example, that they're not quite sure what they tackle first. And if you get them to scale things on 1 to 10, you can begin to prioritize goals that they can work on. And when you revisit it, they can score again to see how it is that they then feel about the issue now. So, for example, if you were doing behaviour management with your trainees, you could get them to score, well, how big an issue do you think it is? And if they say it's an 8, and then you then devise strategies together through the coaching conversations, and then they could score it in the next meeting, and it may be that it's gone down to a 6, and then at least you get a sense of progress. But a 6 is still something which is an issue, and then you can revisit going through some of these questions. And of course, you can hone some of these questions to your own particular situation. So what Lara's going to do in a moment is we're going to play a clip from YouTube, and we will split you into groups straight afterwards. And in those groups, you will decide who is going to be the mentor, who's going to be the observee, and who's going to be the facilitator. And I'll tell you the questions you want you to focus on. But for the time being, keep a focus on the questions that you could ask and your general impressions of the lesson.
Natasha, could you just, is it phase 2? Which one would you like me to play?
Okay, if you play the bottom one, please.
Right, so reception foundation, yeah?
Yeah, so these are primary clips. Can't hear it very well, Lara. Lara, we've got a few people saying that the audio isn't very clear.
Would it be better if I put the link of it in the chat, just in case?
Yeah, so if people start it, if people view it and they view it about a minute in.
That's right, because I'm seeing a lot of heads.
Yeah.
That's fine, let me get that for you. Right, so it's the last clip. Okay, so I'll put this in the chat for everyone.
Clip. It's very short and it just gives you a taster of it. So hopefully you've got the Grow Model questions in the chat. If you click on those, in terms of negative criticism, what does that feel like in terms of your practice? People who were the observees. Thank you, Ronan. So if you didn't hear anything which was particularly helpful, if all you're hearing is things that are wrong, or perhaps if you had a mentor that was a bit like that, what does it feel like?
Very demotivating.
Yeah, and it's like being a student if that's all you hear, or if you think about, say, line managers, for example, if you think about, and as an adult, it's exactly the same thing. If all you're hearing is this is what's wrong and this is what you need to do about it, it is demotivating, and it's also not possible for them to sort out a whole variety of things all in one go. And it's important for us as mentors to guide them as to what are priorities and what needs to be sorted out and then when, by being really clear about what your expectations are. And I think a lot of it goes back to what I mentioned at the beginning in terms of setting expectations from the very beginning, about what your expectations are in school and making sure they're clear and they actually understand all of those. Thank you very much for those. I'm just really conscious in terms of where we are on time. If you will slightly indulge me, I might need to go 5 minutes over, because the second part that we're going to be looking at in terms of part 2 is one that many mentors have said this is the bit they could really do with a little bit of feedback on. So we've had quite a few issues with resulting from some trainees and teacher standards part 2, which is the professional standards aspect of it. This can be, in particular, though I don't want to put people into particular boxes, perhaps trainees who've come straight from university who haven't worked in a professional environment previously, or people who just haven't worked in schools previously and don't necessarily know how schools work. And as mentors, it won't just be sorting out their classroom practice, but it will be all aspects of their practice that you would need to consider. So we're going to get you in breakout rooms again. We've got a couple of scenarios that I'm going to get you to read through first of all, and we'll get you to prioritize them. So we're going to start off with Aisha. So all of these they're anonymized, but they're based on scenarios that we as PCMs have come across previously. So I'm going to get you to read that through, but there will be a copy in the chat for you. So common scenario here of a teacher that thinks that she's very, very good, but one of whom that your observation says something quite different. The second scenario we'd like you to think about is around Felicity. Have a look at this one. This is a shorter one. So what we want you to think about in your groups that we'll put you into into just a moment is consider what it is that you would do and think about what it is you prioritize and how you might potentially facilitate some of the coaching related questions that we looked at previously in the Grow model to try to get them to resolve some of these issues, as opposed to you being very directive and saying this, and this is wrong, which you may need to do in some of these situations. But our first resort needs to be to try and get them to have some kind of self-diagnostic behavior around these kind of issues. So Lara's going to put you into groups. We're going to do those for 5 minutes. So you might want to, in your groups, prioritize. You might have a particular scenario that you want to prioritize, and I'll do a very quick bit of feedback. So if you could join the link as soon as you get it, and The examples are in the chat for your reference. And welcome back. If we start with Aisha and some of the things that you felt could possibly resolve this. It's a very common scenario of a trainee who has a very different perception of their progress compared to you. So what kind of actions could you put into place here that could potentially put this on the right road? Or I might do a hands down and ask somebody. Layla, what would you do?
So we discussed quite a few things. We wanted to, first of all, think about the level of support that they had in their first placement. Mm-hmm. Maybe the expectations were different to that of the second placement. So I think rather than her going into teaching straight away, actually getting her to observe and see actually what the expectations are in this new placement, and guidance really. Yeah, so I think that would be really important. Yeah. Also, she's really enthusiastic. She clearly likes teaching, and I think it's really important not to throw her off. So that's quite important. However, she obviously needs to go in prepared. So setting those expectations from the beginning, I think, is also going to be important.
Yeah, I think you made a number of very good points there. In particular, about getting her understanding about the first placement. You should have a report. If you're in second placement, there should be a report available from the first placement, which should give an overall assessment and also look at aspects that they would need to work on in their second placement. But trainees do need to be aware that the whole point of doing teacher training is you're supposed to have contrasting placements. So if your first placement went amazingly well, that's fantastic, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your second placement is going to be without challenges. And that is the nature of the beast, that you are meant to have something which is contrasting. So there are going to be different issues. She's clearly resting her judgment on her teaching practice, that students are quiet and they do their work. However, she will need to consider aspects around progress as well. So maybe it will be a case of asking her questions along the line of how she's evidencing progress, so that perhaps she can begin to see that, and that that's something that she needs to work on. And perhaps that was her experience in her first placement. Perhaps in that school, they were very, there was a real focus rather on students being quiet and diligently getting on with work. And there are schools like that, and maybe that's what she was focused on. But in your school, you need her to evidence that they're making progress within lessons as well as behaving themselves, which is an important part of practice, but it's not everything, because you can have classes that are very quiet, as we all know, getting on with lessons and learning zip. And so she needs to understand that. Have a look at scenario 2, which is a really interesting one. I'm sure we've all come across somebody like this. So here she had issues with lateness in her previous placement, and she's also a little bit of a gossip while we're there. Any thoughts on this one as to how we could possibly solve this one and what she needs to be made aware of?
Well, my group talked about coming at it from a well-being perspective. You know, was the well-being of the trainee teacher at a good level? Was there something, you know, that she wasn't telling her mentor, or she was holding in, or she was sick, or there was something, you know, wrong? Come at it from that perspective as like a, you know, a safe space before going, you haven't been late so many days of the week.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily to be overlooked, because some universities are very good at it and others not necessarily so. If she is in that placement though, for the second placement, the question is, what do we now do? So she's saying that the journey to school is very, very tricky for her. And that could genuinely be the case. I'm sure there's certain schools that we think in our heads, there's no way that I could work at that school because I just could not do the journey. She's been allocated that school, however, and we're assuming that has been done so with a degree of compliance from her end of things, and with an agreement from her. What could we do from our end of things? Because you can't be late every day, because that's going to have an impact on us, because we have to resource a placement. And if we've got somebody coming in late every day, that's going to have an impact on us. It may mean that we've got to cover the beginning of the lesson. It will have an impact on the kids. what could we do from our end of things?
We talked about asking her to reflect on the impact of her lateness on the pupils in her class, on the colleagues in her department, and the impact of her lateness on her own experience of coming into the room and then having to teach a lesson, having not been there at the beginning.
Yeah.
So to try to get her to be a bit more reflective about, if you don't get somewhere on time, it has a massive knock-on effect to the experience of everybody involved in that class and in the department, none of which are positive.
Yeah.
And so being aware of that, and the implication of the scenario is that because she's late so regularly, that actually she's just a bit of a poor timekeeper, and that she's not taking seriously the importance of meeting that professional standard of being at work on time.
Yeah.
And I think it's also our job as a mentor to point that out to her and to say it's part of the professional standards of any place of work that you have to be able to be there at the time the job starts. And if you're not able to do that, you're not going, you will get into disciplinary kind of procedures. So I completely agree about the well-being and ask about, what's the issue with the journey? Can we look at it together? But, it is also our responsibility to be clear with her what the expectations are of the place of work.
Yeah, that's really succinctly put, Louise. Thank you. And I think it's also, this is where you need to be aware about where you need to pass concerns on. So this is not something that you would need to deal with entirely on your own. So you would need to let your PCMs know that that is the case. You would need to let the university tutor know that that is the case. And if she's had problems around like this in the previous placement, then we would be looking at the possibility of a support plan. So you would not need to carry all of these concerns on your own. Your role, a little bit like if you think about safeguarding, your role is to pass it on so that it can be dealt with by that wider support system. What about the idea that she's essentially criticising other staff members, and that's been something which is overheard in the staff room? Because we all know some staff rooms can be a hub of gossip, but how might we need to advise her in that respect? Oluyemi, I can see you shaking your head. What we need to advise her? You're on mute.
I was shaking my head because I thought that's a no-no. It's not a no-no for staff, and it's no-no for a PGC student, really. It's not professional. It's just not wrong, and it needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed head on. Like, we don't do that here. We should be, with supporting each other and covering each other's back. It's not professional, and I don't think, it needs to be confronted like face to face, like it's a no-no, and it's a no-no. There's really no other way around it.
Yeah, thank you very much. And teaching is something which is where we really do rely on each other so much. The amount of times where I think in my teaching career where I've lent on my colleagues, and if you get a reputation around school as being somebody that is a bit of a backbiter, you're going to find cashing in on that really, really difficult. And so I think educating them a bit about actually what makes us all survive in teaching is each other. And if you abuse that currency, you're going to find teaching really, really tough. And I would go back to the induction as well. Has it been made clear about what start times are, so that when you are bringing them up, as Louise said quite rightly, you are referring not to your own personal ideas, but this is where it says in our policy that this is the time you need to be in. So you can't be accused of this is your perception. No, this is the school's perception as to where we are. So a few key takeaways, because I'm aware of your time and that we are eating into that more than we agreed. So I'm going to move on. So our key takeaways from this are, if I could just get Lara, just the final slide, please, Lara, is that you do wear very many different hats as a mentor, and it's important to get that balance between support and challenge. Please go back and use instructional coaching, and it's not something that we can do entirely in with this one session, so please go back and revisit it. This will be forwarded to you by your PCMs, and we're more than happy to be contacted if you've got any additional questions. And please make sure that we're supporting our mentees through socialization, and that we're not judge mentoring our mentees, and we're guiding them through high support and high challenge at the same time. I'm just going to pass very quickly to Tessa, who's got a couple of words, and Lara's got one thing for you, and we're going to wrap up in a couple of minutes. Tessa.
Thank you, Natasha and Lara. It's a really exciting time for our work with mentors across the region. As Ruth mentioned, in terms of the sort of lead up to 2024 and the new initial teacher education quality requirements, and the fact that East London Teaching School Hub Mulberry College of Teaching will be a provider of initial teacher education. But we're also recruiting facilitators across the hub to work with colleagues on our early career framework programme, so ECTs and their mentors. And we're currently recruiting facilitators. So if you know a fantastic facilitator who will be able to work with our ECTs or our mentors, I'd direct you to those the information that I'll just put in the chat. And you yourself might be something that you're interested in. We're really lucky that we've got fantastic facilitators like Lara and Natasha working across Tower Hamlets and Hackney, and we're really keen to diversify the range of schools we work with in the region. So have a look at the information and pass it on if you know other colleagues. Thank you.
And Lara is, I think you've just done it. Okay, so Tessa's just put that link into the chat. Please click on it, and I'm sure Tessa's very happy to be contacted with any questions. Lara's just going to pop the evaluation form into the chat for you now. If you could complete that, it will literally take you a couple of minutes tops, and if you could do that now, that would be super appreciated. And your feedback goes on to inform further mentoring trainings and other support that you might require through the East London Teaching Schools hubs. If you could have a look at that now, that would be wonderful. And from all of us, I'd just like to thank you very much for your participation. Apologies again for running slightly over. We're usually quite timely, but unfortunately we had some technical issues just towards the beginning. So thank you so much for your patience. And if you could please make sure that you submit that. If you have any other questions, I'm happy, myself, Tessa and Lara, to stay online with any other specific queries that you may have. Otherwise, once you have submitted that, thank you very much and good luck with your mentoring. And please do contact us if there's any support that you may need. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.